Morning, I recognized my own grandson. I was holding a pot of coffee I nearly dropped on the floor of the Hartwell Grand Hotel. I've worked the breakfast shift there for 11 years. 6 days a week, 5:30 in the morning, sensible shoes, hair pinned back. My name tag says Winifred, but most of the regulars call me Miss Winnie. The managers keep talking about mandatory retirement at 65, and I keep showing up anyway because what else am I going to do? Sit in my apartment in Louisville and think about everything I lost. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Not that Tuesday morning with the coffee pot. Earlier, much earlier, when I was 34 years old and still foolish enough to believe that a man who wore expensive shoes and opened car doors was a good man. His name was Clifford. Clifford Dale Harmon. He came from Lexington, money old Kentucky family, the kind that had their portraits done in oil and hung them in the hallway like they were royalty. I was a school teacher. 4th grade. I had 22 students that year and I knew all their birthdays by heart. I was not the kind of woman anyone expected Clifford Harmon to marry, and his mother, a thin-lipped woman named Augusta, made sure I knew that from the day he brought me home for Thanksgiving dinner. We married anyway. I was in love, the way you're in love, when you're young and you confuse intensity for devotion. Our daughter was born in March of 1991. We named her Lily Ann, 7 pounds 2 ounces. She had Clifford's nose and my hands, long fingers, the kind my mother always said were made for piano keys. I spent 3 days in the hospital after a difficult delivery, and I remember lying there with her on my chest thinking that nothing bad could ever touch us again, that I had built something real, something mine. She was 4 months old when Clifford sat down across from me at the kitchen table one night and told me he wanted a divorce. I want to be careful here, because I've spent 30 years being angry, and I've also spent 30 years trying to understand. But what I know is this: Augusta Harmon had never accepted me. She had spent 4 years of our marriage chipping away at her son, telling him I was beneath his family, that our daughter deserved to be raised in a proper Harmon home with a proper Harmon upbringing. And Clifford, weak in the way that some men are weak when their mothers are involved, eventually agreed. The divorce proceedings were brutal. I was a school teacher making $31,000 a year. Clifford had a family attorney who had been handling Harmon business since before I was born. The custody evaluation went sideways in ways I still don't fully understand. There were depositions. There were witnesses I had never met who suddenly had never met, who suddenly had opinions about my mental stability, my fitness as a mother. At one point, Augusta herself sat in that courtroom and told the judge, with a straight face, that she had witnessed me shaking Lily during a crying episode. It never happened. I would cut off my own hand before I hurt that child. But I lost. I lost primary custody. I was given supervised visitation every other weekend, pending a psychological review. The psychological review kept getting rescheduled. The supervised visits became unsupervised for exactly 2 months before Clifford filed an emergency motion claiming I had taken Lily out of state without permission, which was a lie. We had gone to Cincinnati to see my sister for a birthday dinner, 45 minutes across the border. The emergency motion resulted in a temporary suspension of my visitation rights. That suspension lasted 3 years. By the time I had saved enough money to hire a different attorney and fight back properly, Clifford had married a woman named Constance, and Constance had quietly begun a second-parent adoption of Lily. Augusta funded it. By the time I understood what was happening, the paperwork was filed in a county 2 hours from Louisville, where I had no connections, no history, no standing. My name was stripped from the birth certificate. My daughter, my Lily Ann, was legally renamed Lily Constance Harmon. I was erased. I want you to understand what that does to a person. Not the grief I could have survived. It was the silence that nearly killed me. I had no legal right to contact her, no right to send a birthday card, no right to drive past her school and look for her in the yard at recess. I did it anyway a few times, and then I stopped because it was making me into something I didn't recognize. A woman crouched in a parked car on a public street, staring at second graders on a playground, looking for her own child's face. I stopped. I moved on. I taught school for 12 more years, and then the district consolidated and my position was eliminated. And I was 51, and the job market for middle-aged teachers in Louisville was not what anyone would call encouraging. I had a little savings. I had a 2-bedroom apartment. I downsized to a 1-bedroom. I applied for a hospitality training program through the county workforce office because I had read that hotels hired older workers and offered benefits. That's how I ended up at the Hartwell Grand. That's how I ended up in sensible shoes pouring coffee at 5:30 in the morning, 6 days a week, 11 years running. I had not heard my daughter's name spoken aloud in almost 30 years. I don't know exactly when Lily came back to Louisville. I found out later it was about 2 years before that Tuesday morning. She'd taken a position at the regional hospital. A hospitalist, physician, internal medicine, Dr. Lily Harmon Cross. Married name Cross. Augusta had died in 2019. Clifford had retired to a golf community in Sarasota. And Lily, my Lily, had, from what I understand, been quietly asking questions about me for almost a decade before she finally hired someone to find me. But I didn't know any of that on the Tuesday morning I nearly dropped the coffee pot. What I knew was this. A woman had come in with the 7 o'clock breakfast crowd, was seated at table 9, and I was the one assigned to that section. She looked about 30, maybe 32, dark hair pulled back. Tired in the way that doctors are tired. Not sleepy tired, but worn through tired. The kind that sits in the shoulders and around the eyes. She was wearing a lanyard from the hospital, University of Louisville Health, and she was reading something on her phone while she waited. I walked over to pour her coffee, and she held out her mug without looking up, the way busy people do, and I saw her hands. Long fingers, the kind my mother always said were made for piano keys. I stood there. I don't know how long enough that she looked up. She had my mother's eyes, gray-green, slightly asymmetrical, with that particular way of focusing that my sister always called the Caldwell stare. My maiden name was Caldwell. Those eyes have been in our family for 4 generations. I said, "I'm sorry, honey, Are you from Louisville originally?" She looked at me with that careful expression doctors have when a stranger asks them something personal. Polite, but cautious. "No," she said. "I grew up in Lexington. I moved here a couple years ago for work." I poured her coffee. My hand was not steady. Forgive me, this is a strange question. Do you by any chance play piano?" She set her phone down. She was looking at me differently now. "I did," she said slowly. "When I was little. How did you—" "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be odd. You just reminded me of someone." I walked back to the service station, and I stood there with my back to the room, and I breathed. I told myself I was 63 years old, and I had built a life, and I was not going to come apart in the breakfast room of the Hartwell Grand over a stranger with familiar hands. But I took my break early, and I sat in the locker room, and I cried into a dish towel until my supervisor knocked on the door to check on me. Her name was Jackie, my supervisor, and she has been one of the most sensible women I have ever known. I told her what happened, not all of it, just enough. Enough that she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Winnie, do you need to go home?" I said no. I went back out. Table 9 was empty. The woman in the hospital lanyard had paid her check and left. I thought that was the end of it. She came back Thursday, same time, 7 o'clock. She sat at table 9 again, and I almost asked Jackie to swap sections with me, but Jackie gave me a look that said she would not be doing that. So I walked over, and the woman looked up before I even reached the table, like she had been watching for me. "You were here Tuesday," she said. "I work Tuesdays," I said. "Coffee, please." She watched me pour. "You asked me about piano. I remember. I apologize again for that." She wrapped both hands around the mug. Those hands. "My adoptive mother got me lessons starting when I was 5, she said very carefully. "I was pretty good. I stopped when I was in high school. My Clifford, the man who raised me, he said it wasn't practical. He wanted me focused on academics." A pause. I always wished I'd kept it up. I don't know what my face did. I hope it didn't give me away completely, but I think it must have, because she said very quietly, "I'm looking for someone." I said, "I know." And then neither of us said anything for almost a full minute. Her name was still Lily. She had kept that much. She told me later that when she was 16, she had found a box in Augusta's attic, old documents, photographs, a photocopy of an original birth certificate with a different mother's name on it. She had asked Clifford about it, and he told her it was a clerical error, corrected years ago, nothing to worry about. She had believed him for 7 more years before she didn't anymore. We didn't say everything there in the breakfast room of the Hartwell Grand. There were other customers, and I still had 4 tables, and I am a professional. But when my shift ended at 2 o'clock, she was waiting in the lobby. She had taken the morning off from the hospital. She was sitting in one of the wingback chairs near the fireplace, and when she saw me come through the service door in my coat, she stood up. I walked over to her. I didn't know what to say. I have replayed this moment many times since, and I still don't know if I handled it right. What I did was, I sat down in the chair across from hers and I said, "I looked for you. I want you to know that. I looked for you for a long time, and then I stopped because I thought maybe it was better for you if I wasn't in your life, disrupting things." I told myself that. I'm not sure I believed it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I had a good childhood. I want to be honest about that. My Constance was kind to me. I had things I needed. I'm not going to tell you it was terrible." "Good," I said. "And I meant it. I did. But I always felt like something was missing," she said. "And I didn't know what it was for a very long time. And then I found that birth certificate." She looked at her hands. "And I started playing piano again. Just by myself, at home. I don't know why. It helped." I didn't say anything. I was not going to be able to speak without crying, and I had already cried twice this week in professional settings, and I was drawing a line. She looked up. "She told me your name." "Who?" "Constance." A long pause. "She got sick 2 years ago. She's better now. She's fine. But when she thought she might not be, she told me. She told me the whole story. She said she had known for most of my life that what they did was wrong. She said she was sorry." I sat with that. "I hired someone to find you," Lily said. "It took about 8 months. You don't have much of an online presence." "I have a Facebook," I said. "I post pictures of my tomatoes." She laughed. It was the first time I heard her laugh, and it was exactly like mine. Too loud for the room. Not sorry about it at all. I had to close my eyes. We did a DNA test at her suggestion. It felt strange to need that kind of confirmation when I had known from the moment I saw her hands. But I understood why she needed it, and I was not going to argue with anything that kept her in my orbit. The results came back in 9 days. 99.9% probability. Parent-child. She texted me a screenshot with a single message. "Hi, Mom. I've read that text message more times than I can count. Now. Clifford. I want to be fair. Clifford Harmon did not kidnap my daughter in the way you imagine kidnappers. In the dark, with violence. He did it with attorneys and paperwork and a mother who had money and connections and no conscience. He did it slowly and legally and in full daylight, and that is its own kind of theft. You don't always need shadows to take something that doesn't belong to you." When Lily told him she had found me, he did not apologize. I was not expecting one, but she was. She drove to Sarasota and sat across from her father in his golf community clubhouse and told him what she knew. And he told her that everything he did was to protect her from an unstable mother, that I had been mentally unwell and a danger, and that she should be grateful for the family he had built for her. She drove home. She did not go back. I found out later, through Lily, who had her own reasons for keeping track, that Clifford's retirement had been a graceful exit from a business that had been declining for years. The Harmon family commercial real estate holdings, which had seemed so formidable when I was 34, had been steadily liquidated since Augusta's death. There was less left than anyone outside the family knew. The golf community condo had a mortgage. The portrait in the hallway of the old Lexington house had been sold at auction. I am not going to pretend I was sorry to hear that. There is a particular kind of satisfaction that comes not from revenge, but from watching the ground level out. When you have spent 30 years standing at the bottom of a hill looking up at someone who put you there, and then the hill simply flattens. Not by your hand, just by time and consequence, and the natural way of things. I thought I would feel triumphant. Mostly I just felt tired. And then, after the tired, I felt something closer to peace. Lily and I have dinner every Sunday now. She drives over from the Highlands neighborhood. She has a little house there, a craftsman. She planted a vegetable garden last spring. We compared notes on tomatoes for about 45 minutes on our third Sunday dinner. And she called me a few days later to ask if I thought she should do raised beds. And I said yes, absolutely, the drainage alone makes it worth it. And it was the most ordinary conversation, and I could not stop smiling for the rest of the day. She has a colleague at the hospital, a cardiologist named Bennett, who she is being extremely casual about in a way that tells me she is not casual about him at all. I have not pushed. I have waited 63 years for the right to be patient with this woman, and I am going to use it correctly. I still work the breakfast shift at the Hartwell Grand. Jackie keeps telling me I can cut back to 4 days, and I keep telling her I'll think about it. The truth is, I love that job. I love the early morning when the lobby is still and the kitchen is coming alive and the light comes in off the river a particular way in October that I've never seen matched anywhere else. I love my regulars. I love having a place to be. But I love Sunday dinner more. Last week, Lily brought over a keyboard. One of those weighted digital ones, compact, not cheap. She set it up in my living room and said she'd found it on Facebook Marketplace and thought maybe we could figure it out together. I told her I hadn't played since college. My technique was probably a disaster. She said that was fine. We spent 2 hours on a beginner's version of something, both of us laughing at the mistakes, her hands and my hands on the same keys. Long fingers, made for piano, my mother always said. She was right. She was right about that. I've thought a lot about what it means when something taken from you finds its way back. Not through a miracle, not through luck. Just through time, doing what time eventually does, surfacing what was buried, leveling what was propped up on a false foundation. Clifford spent 30 years believing he had won, and in the short term, he had. He had the attorneys and the money and the mother with connections, and I had a teacher's salary and a public defender who was handling 14 other cases. The system moved in his direction because systems often do when one side has more resources than the other. That's not cynicism, that's just the truth of how it went. I watched it happen and I couldn't stop it, and I had to decide what I was going to do with myself after. What I chose in the end was to keep going. Not heroically. Not with a plan. I just kept showing up, to work, to my apartment, to my sister's house for dinner on Sundays when the quiet in my own place got too heavy. I didn't have a strategy for surviving. I just refused to stop, one day at a time for 30 years. And Clifford built something on a lie. He told Lily I was unstable. He told the court I was a danger. He told Augusta whatever she needed to hear to keep her funding the fight. And every single one of those choices required another choice to maintain it, and another after that until the whole structure of his life was load-bearing on a story that wasn't true. You can build a long way on a bad foundation, but you cannot build a long way on a bad foundation. But you cannot build forever. Augusta died. The business declined. The portrait in the hallway sold at auction. Not because anyone punished him, because the weight of maintaining a false life is enormous, and it costs something every single year, and eventually the bill comes due. I didn't do that to him. I didn't have to. He did it to himself the way people always do, slowly and without noticing until it was already done. What I know now, at 63, sitting across from my daughter at Sunday dinner while she talks about raised garden beds and pretends she isn't in love with a cardiologist named Bennett. What I know is that integrity is not a reward system. I didn't stay honest and keep going because I believed something good would happen if I did. I did it because it was the only way I knew how to live with myself. The return of Lily was not payment for my suffering. It was just life. Continuing. It was a woman with my mother's eyes and my grandmother's hands finding her way back to where she came from, because the truth has a direction and it tends to move toward the light whether we help it or not. That's what I want to leave you with. Not a promise that things will be fixed if you're patient enough, but something quieter than that. Dignity compounds. The choices you make about who you are. When no one is watching, when there's no audience, when the courtroom has emptied and the documents are signed and you are alone in a too-quiet apartment, those choices build something real, something that holds, something that, 30 years later, your daughter can find her way back to. I still pour coffee at 5:30 in the morning. I still wear sensible shoes. And every Sunday, those long-fingered hands that look like mine reach across my kitchen table and I think, it held everything I built in the silence. It held.